John Irath is still with us. John is a senior policy director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington, D.C. John, the Prime Minister did indicate during his speech in the Congress about the issue of terrorism, where he says the world must overcome all such forces sponsoring and even exporting terror. How can America help India in countering terrorism?
I think there is already an example for cooperation between law enforcement agencies in both countries, but there is room for growth in this cooperation, sharing of information in particular, and in greater coordination to counter the work of extremist groups, but also in the information sphere. It is important that correct information be out there to counter the propaganda efforts of non-democratic and terrorist-supporting regimes that are being made on a daily basis. And with the high level of information technology in both the US and India, this would be a very ripe area for cooperation.
John, as we're still talking about security and terrorism, the Indian Prime Minister and also the US President were quite enthusiastic when they were talking about technology, where the Indian Prime Minister did indicate that technology will determine the security, prosperity and leadership in the 21st century, including technology in matters of security. How can that benefit India?
It will benefit the world if the next generation of information networking is constructed on the principle that such networks exist to facilitate the free and open flow of information. In other words, democratic value. There's an alternate vision out there that technology and technological networks should serve the state as a means of control of population. That is anti-democratic. The US and India have a clear joint interest in the first model, that technology be used to increase understanding, flows of information, and the free exchange of ideas worldwide.
John Irath, stay with me. John is a senior policy director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington. I'm also talking to our correspondents, Susan Teherani and Molly Gambir is back. Molly, coming to you. The Prime Minister, in his speech before the Congress, he did indicate about India's stance in the ongoing war in Ukraine, where he said that this is an era of dialogue and diplomacy and not for war or of war. This has been an ongoing reverberation of the Prime Minister wherever he goes, that he doesn't want to comment about the war in Ukraine. He just wants to talk about diplomacy, he just wants to talk about peace. And this is the same thing that the US President did indicate, that we are here for peace. Maybe you can tell us more about that.
Well, the Indian Prime Minister has emphasized that this is not an era of war, it is an era of dialogue, and that's something that the Indian Prime Minister and the Indian side has been emphasizing on for the longest time. Of course, the Russia-Ukraine war has resulted in a lot of question marks around the relationships vis-a-vis India and the relationship that India has vis-a-vis its partnership with Russia. Also, whether or not this is a point at which India and the United States can converge. So a lot of the reason why we are seeing, the Russia-Ukraine war being a part of the discussions, experts have been pointing out about how India's stand on the Russia-Ukraine war has been loud, clear and consistent, but it does remain to be seen to what extent the United States and how the United States continues to see this stance, because we have seen a certain change as far as the tone and tenor of the United States outlook towards India's stance is concerned, which is very interesting as well. And the Russia-Ukraine war, of course, has carried on for 16 months, and it has resulted in relationships standing at a crucial juncture as well, and the Indian Prime Minister once again reiterating what India's stance on the war is all about.
Susan Tehrani, the US President Joe Biden did talk about the G20 summit, which will take place in India in September. He said that sustainable development should be at the center of the G20 agenda this year. He also said that India and Americans are people who innovate and create. Is this a way of the president wooing investors to come to India and to also accompany him to the G20, you think?
Yes, possibly. And also, remember, President Biden right now is also candidate Biden. In a lot of the comments that he made, at least 2 or 3 times, he talked about how business relations with India will be to the benefit of the American public ultimately. At one point, he said that American manufacturing is back because Boeing manufacturing, creating more than 1 million jobs in 44 states. And then on the other hand, he talked about how the shared interest between the two sides is to really move forward with not only technology, but the technology know-how as well. So, yes, President Biden really looks at this partnership not only from an economic standpoint, but also, there is almost 5 million Indian Americans here in the U.S., and a lot of them live in swing states. They're watching this relationship. They do go to the ballot box. So a lot of what he was saying, yes, is to the benefit of the United States for it to diversify its supply chain and have India as a main market for its business. But it's also to the benefit of Joe Biden to say how beneficial this partnership is for the United States itself and its people. And I think we saw glimmers of that, at least during his press conference.
John Irath is a senior policy director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington, D.C. John, thank you very much for staying with us. The president was questioned, the president of the United States was questioned about his relationship with China, where he had indicated a few days ago that the president of China is a dictator. Well, he did say that his stance on China will not change. He also indicated that he is planning to meet the president of China, Xi Jinping, in some time from now. We also saw the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, make his tour to China, his first visit to China. What did you read from all these developments?
I think that the big thing to read in these developments is that the relationship with China is of very great importance, and that there is an understanding on the part of the President and the Secretary of State that while there is a competition with China, it need not be defined in military terms. That there is scope for dialogue, there is scope to work out what differences there may be in a peaceful, rational way that benefits both sides. The U.S. and China are huge trading partners. The volume of trade that goes back and forth is beneficial to both economies, and both economies depend largely on that trade continuing uninterrupted. So there is plenty of common ground on which there can be a discussion.
Well, I've been talking to John Irath. He's a senior policy director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington, D.C. John, thank you very much for talking to WION World is One. I'll have to let you go at this hour. I'm still with our correspondents, Susan Tehrani and Molly Gambhir. Molly, there was a kind of sensitive topic that was brought up during the press conference with Joe Biden and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi when it came to minorities or addressing the minority issue in India, where the Prime Minister did say that democracy is in our DNA, it runs in our system, it is in our constitution. There is no space for discrimination on basis of caste, creed, or even religion. How do you see that statement from the Prime Minister?
Well, that has been, as you put it, Eric, the takeaway from that statement. Of course, there will be a lot of discussions about what the implications of that statement have been. There will be a lot of opportunities to dissect what the Indian Prime Minister said, and also how his statement will be perceived here in the United States and also back home and around the world as well. But the very fact that the Indian Prime Minister has said what he has been reason enough for this to actually be highlighted as another headline out of this visit as well. And the Prime Minister saying that there is no place for discrimination in the country. And as you pointed out, the key takeaways from what he said as a part of his response as well. This was, of course, during after the discussions that the two leaders had, and also in the context of what the two leaders have said vis-a-vis their partnership, their joint statement, and then there were questions that were posed to them, and that is when this topic came up, and the message that the Indian Prime Minister has sent out, like I said, will be discussed, because it is rare for such a statement to be made at such a platform. Right. And the ramifications as far as the discussions are concerned are wide-ranging, but this is just one of the many statements that were made by the two leaders.
Right. Morley Gambhir is at the White House, and we also have our correspondent Susan Teherani in New York, who will be keeping our eyes on this state dinner, which is live on your screens right now. The guests have already taken their seats. The Indian Prime Minister is already at the White House. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, who is the host of this state dinner and banquet, have already taken their seats. These are guests who have been invited, and as Jessica Stone did indicate, over 400 guests have been invited for this state dinner, which is being hosted by United States President Joe Biden and his wife, the First Lady of the United States, Dr. Jill Biden, for Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. You are watching WION World is One. More updates and coverage of this Indian Prime Minister's visit of the United States continues.
भारत के 140 करोड़ देशवासियों का सम्मान है। हम दोनों देश अपनी विविधता पर गर्व करते हैं। इस कालखंड में भारत और अमेरिका की मित्रता पूरे विश्व के सामर्थ्य को बढ़ाने में पूरक होगी।